So Intel's 12th generation Alderlake has just been announced. Should you buy it? We're going to talk about why you should and why you may want to avoid it. So let's get started. Hey guys, Tiago here with Classical Technology. Remember to subscribe and smash that like button. We talk a lot about PC hardware, GPUs, CPUs, what's happening in the market, lots of potentially very important information. Some people haven't even been able to get a GPU because of some of my videos. But today we're going to talk about the new Intel 12th generation Alder Lake. A little bit of history. Intel the last several years has been taking pretty much an absolute beating from AMD's Ryzen. Pretty much every single AMD chip, especially the current generation rather, the AMD 5000, pretty much decimated anything that Intel had to offer, not only in the mainstream chips like the 11900K, which was, frankly a little bit embarrassing, but also even the 18-core 10980XE, which is supposed to be the HEDT processor, the one that really enthusiasts would really want to get. But unfortunately for Intel, AMD really came packing the heat this generation with something like the 5950X, which pretty much blurred the line between extreme high performance as well as the mainstream. So now Intel, with their new CEO, that they've made a lot of changes, pretty much is trying to jump back in the game, and the CEO even said that he wants to sort of take that lead away from AMD. He recognizes the good that they did, of course, how can you not? In order to be objective and be better in the future, they really have to recognize the mistakes that they've made. They're a very large company with a lot of resources, but unfortunately, they really rested on their laurels for far too many years while letting the competition catch up and then eventually surpassing them. Now they have to sort of play a catch-up game. You can definitely know that AMD is going to be behind the scenes trying to answer what Intel is doing, but I must say Intel certainly is back pretty strong as far as we can see from the specs and some of the information. Of course, we're going to have to see more in-depth reviews and benchmarks to see where they really stand, but so far in terms of their performance that they're offering and the pricing that it's coming at really doesn't seem that bad. It seems like it's a pretty good thing for us gamers, pretty good news considering all of the GPU problems we've had the last year with unavailable and extremely overpriced GPUs. So at least it's a little bit good news that we can actually get some CPUs that perform really great for a reasonable price. And who knows, Intel may even have AMD on their toes. Previously, the Threadripper 5000 was supposed to be released as early as August, but that seems to have perhaps been canceled. We have basically no news of it at all. We do have the Pro Threadripper CPUs, but nothing to sort of upgrade the current Threadripper CPUs. Now, perhaps AMD caught wind of what Intel was doing with these chips, and perhaps Intel has some more HEDT higher end chips coming that will sort of match the sort of performance gains and pricing with the current 12th gen lineup that they've announced. So let's talk about a few reasons why you should buy the 12th generation Intel, as well as some reasons why you shouldn't in order to balance it out. First, a reason to get into this new Intel system. I mean, Intel is back. If you were an Intel fan in the past, I think most likely you'll like what they're doing here. We do have to wait for more benchmarks and reviews, but it seems so far in terms of performance that these chips, at least for gaming, should be the superior gaming chips. Now, it may also be that for sort of multitasking performance, they may be highly competitive with Ryzen. Then you're going to want to look at availability and pricing here to determine if something like a 5950X is better for you rather than something like a 12900K, which most likely, due to its more unique nature, may not necessarily have the same multi-core performance as that chip, but it may excel in gaming. So we're going to have to see, and the jury is sort of out on that one. Now, and the reason why maybe you should avoid the Intel 12th generation, it's going to be completely new hardware. There's going to be a lot of new ecosystem parts that are going to go with this, and this brings us to our next positive point. It's completely new hardware. For once, Intel has really been bringing sort of the forefront of technological advances. Mainly, I'm talking about things like DDR5, PCIe Generation 5. There are a lot of things that are really cool on the motherboards coming up and that Intel 12th generation will support, and that's going to leave pretty much all of the other generations in the dust. Of course, the first of which will be Intel's own 11900K in the 11th generation, which in my opinion seems like it was just basically basically a stopgap of lower performance so that these chips look better when compared to the previous generation. And of course, AMD is also going to be left behind a little bit here. They're still on PCIe Generation 4, which had a lot shorter lifespan than something like PCIe Generation 3, but Generation 5, certainly as it's implemented better and better in the future, will bring with it a lot of great performance improvements, better efficiency, better power, things like PCIe lanes and the way they're split up. That's all going to improve with the sort of Generation 5 as well. One positive of the DDR5, it seems like at least these motherboards will be backwards compatible with DDR4. Of course, you can't interchange them or mix them on the exact same setup, but if you still have the older DDR4 memory laying around from a different build or something like that, you should be able to use it, and you don't necessarily have to go to the new standard, which may be a good idea to wait a little bit until BIOS and different updates like that really start to take effect, because of course anytime you go into a new ecosystem like this, there are always little hiccups and problems with newer hardware. Now, another reason you may want to consider sort of the Intel 12th generation, the pricing actually seems pretty fair. They've announced the pricing of the top end 12900K at around $589. For the type of performance this chip is packing, certainly seems pretty reasonable. I mean, even AMD's 5950X comes in at $749, albeit that may have better multi-core performance, yet to be seen, but still $589 seems like a reasonable price point for a high-end mainstream CPU nowadays. Now, you will have the 12700K as well as the other SKUs in the lineup that have some pretty good price to performance as far as we can see. Even the i5 seems to be priced really well for the performance that it's packing, especially compared to previous generation Intels. So if you're looking for price to performance, Intel for a long time was really not the king of that. That's how AMD was able to best Intel for many years. They just had better price to performance. But Ryzen 5000 did get a little bit more expensive, so Intel saw a little bit of room in order to be able to really get in there with some very competitive chips that are priced considerably better as well. Now, a con is going to be that going into a new ecosystem, this is going to be LGA 1700, meaning that your existing motherboard, if you have a Z690 or something like that, will not work with these processors. You're going to need a new motherboard. And perhaps you may even want to pick up Gen 5 RAM, even though you don't necessarily have to. It should work with 4. Now, the new motherboard thing, the motherboards are a little bit more expensive, so keep that in mind. They do pack more features than previous generations. Now, when I say more expensive, I'm probably comparing more to Z490, Z390 generation. It seems like as soon as the AMD 5000 came out and then Intel Z590, motherboard prices went up across the board. Of course, this will be due to the tariffs and manufacturing delays and the general shortages issues that we've seen with GPUs also happen to some effect with these motherboards. So keep that in mind. You're going to need a new motherboard. As far as I can see, there are definitely a lot of great options there. They're not all really that expensive. Most of them, some are going to be like the, the Asus, the popular, Hero and things like that. Certainly they went up in price a bit. They're like $500 motherboards now, but other ones do seem to be reasonable. So really doesn't seem like that bad of a price to performance proposition. And when you consider the Intel processors seem to be priced pretty reasonably, certainly isn't that bad at all. Now, one thing that you should think about, should you purchase as soon as they're released? It should be early November now, next week. Or should you wait for reviews and see if they're really going to be worth it before you make that decision? Now, this is a tricky point. Generally, you always want to wait for reviews before you pre-order or you even the day of go and purchase, just so you make a more informed opinion. But just keep in mind, if you do that, it may come with the risk that these are going to sell out very quickly, and then you're going to be maybe months waiting for a CPU, or you're going to perhaps have to overpay a scalper to get it on the secondhand market. Now, we don't know what availability is going to be like on these Intel CPUs. If it's anything like the previous launches of AMD or Nvidia, you can expect it to be very tough to find some of the higher end SKUs, but it is Intel after all. We have to see how they're going to be reaccepted into sort of the high end, computing market, and maybe they have more stock lined up in order to really try and take back a lot of that market share that they lost from AMD. So it remains to be seen, but keep that in mind. You can wait for reviews, but you may miss out on getting the chip at a reasonable price right now. Now, while these processors may draw a lot of power. They're high performance after all. If you're worried about GPU bottlenecking, if you were able to get a newer RTX 3000 or even an AMD 6000 series GPU, these should be some of the best CPUs and motherboard systems around in order to make sure you absolutely reduce any type of bottlenecking. This is going to be first because these chips are just really great for gaming. They have fantastic single core performance. They have really great IPC. Latency is going to be very low. A lot of things are going in the favor of these processors. Of course, the faster DDR5 RAM, not to mention the motherboards with PCIe Generation 5. If people used to be worried about the jump from 3 to 4, 5, I mean, that's a higher number. That has to be better, right? So your CPU bottleneck, as it concerns your GPU, this should be literally the best generation ever for CPUs and GPUs in terms of less bottlenecking. So AMD 5000 performed tremendously well. Generally, you could really have these higher end GPUs and have them not bottleneck that much, but this one really looks like it's going to be the best one yet. So I'm excited to try them out and see how the performance on the newer RTX 3000 GPUs can be unleashed with these type of processors. Alright guys, so these are some of my ideas on the new Intel 12th generation Alderlake. Certainly very exciting to have competition back in the market. We'll see what AMD responds with, and for now I would keep an eye on these CPUs, see what reviews come out. I'm also going to make some more videos on the motherboards and the accompanying ecosystem as time goes on. So remember to stay subscribed, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.